Hi, everyone. This is Raquel.
Hi, and this is Jennifer.
Welcome to Madness Cafe.
This is a feminist podcast where we talk about women's issues, politics, and health and wellness.
And where those issues intersect. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Madness Cafe. Today, Jennifer and I are joined by a very special guest. Her name is Ryan Rae Harbuck. And for those of you who are watching on YouTube, here's her book right here. And you can see it behind Jennifer there. And before we get into the book, which is called When I Grow Up, I Want to Be a Chair, here is Ryan's introduction. A paralyzing car accident in her teens left Ryan with a new life to build. Rarely looking back, she became a swim coach and a high school teacher. She traveled to India for experimental stem cell treatment. She fought hard to make the Paralympic swim team. She even became a mom. With so many stories to tell and lessons to learn, Ryan did the only thing she could. She wrote a book, which came out, well, just recently. So just in the past couple months. Yeah. And like I said, the name of Ryan's book is When I Grow Up, I Want to Be a Chair. It is a fantastic book. And Ryan, we are so very happy to have you on the show.
Yeah, I'm so glad to be here today. And I'm so appreciative that you guys took the time to read my book.
It's a great book. You have such a fascinating story and the book is so well written. And so everybody needs to go out and get this book for sure.
So I'm going to start the first question with reading a little of something you wrote, and then I'll have you introduce yourself and tell us your story. This is what you wrote. You said, everyone has a chair. That thing you are bound to or unwillingly defines you, an element that makes you different from the rest, one that you have a little choice in the matter. What's your chair? Such a great question. Tell us about it.
You know, it's so funny because I think most writers would start with that thought and then fill in the blank. And to be quite honest, that's what I finished with. That was after I had written the entire book, after I had reflected on all of these experiences in my life and the lessons that I've learned. And I was literally preparing to send it out to the world. The very last minute wrote that piece because that's all of a sudden it just hit me that was the take home. And I think that it did take me about 15 years to write the entire book. And so I was kind of thankful for that because a lot of the stories and the things that were important to me 15 years ago, I might have forgotten otherwise. And so to be able to kind of take little snippets of my life over the last 15 years and figure out what's really important. And then, you know, I almost like wish that everybody would do this and, you know, take little pieces of their lives, write them out, and then sit with them and realize that there's like actually a lot of things in there, a lot of really important pieces of yourself. And, you know, one thing that I kept coming back to is there was these stories and all the stories were different, but the themes were all the same. And the things that I was learning was the same. And the thing I was struggling with was the same. You know, it was a really, really cathartic experience. I'm still sort of, with the book newly out, I'm still sort of trying to kind of figure out my emotions around everything. And so it's kind of a wild time right now. So it's fun to talk to you guys.
Wow.
But if you like, I can kind of go back to sort of where the book starts.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, mostly the book starts with the fact that I was paralyzed in a car accident when I was 16 years old. Locally, it was a really big deal. I remember I was on the news for weeks and weeks and months. And it was because it was 6 kids in a vehicle together driving home from a school dance. There were no drugs or alcohol involved, and just the car ended up crossing the median of a highway and it hit another car head on. Everybody was hurt instantly. And 2 people died actually in the car accident. I ended up flying out of the side window. We were in a Suburban and I was in the back seat. And so I flew out that window and I landed about, the paramedics suggested about 75 feet away from the car.
Wow.
And so they actually told me that they had a hard time finding me originally because I was so far removed from the actual wreckage. And I should stop and I should say that I actually have no recollection of the accident. I have no memory from even about the day before to about a week after. Yeah, and your brain does that. It's like this really fascinating thing where if you have something really truly traumatic, your brain can kind of guard you a little bit from that event. And so all of these things that I talk about and write about, they're just pieces from other people's stories, other people from our accident, other EMTs, paramedics, all of these people that were there that night and trying to piece that story together. And it works out really well for me because I don't have a huge emotional tie to what happened that night. And it's almost like this fairy tale story that I just tell over and over again. I do, actually, I'm not sure that I do. I was going to say that I do understand, the severity of it, but I'm not sure that I actually do. I know that I almost died that night. I do, but I don't know that my heart really understands that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, like you said, I mean, that's a way of your, well, you were saying your brain, but I think your heart also is protecting you from that, because I don't think that would be useful for you. You don't need to remember that
Totally.
feeling.
Yeah. And I think, I was 16 years old when that happened. And I often share with people that I think that it actually happened at a really good time in my life, because in all reality, I was a kid. The things that were important to me were I wanted to go hang out with my friends. After the accident happened, it was sort of kind of, I didn't really spend a lot of time dwelling on what had happened. It was more like, okay, that's fine, but how can I go back to hanging out with my friends again?
Mhm.
And so I think that I was able to sort of progress and move forward a lot easier than, say, if I was a full-grown adult with a family of my own and something like that happened.
One of the things I found really interesting in the book was when you were talking about that and the effect it had on you versus the effect it had on your family, and how you felt like it actually was a little bit more traumatic to them than it actually was to you.
Absolutely. And I would say my family, I would say my friend group and their families. I think everybody, if you think about it, when something happens to you, it's you. And so you just kind of figure it out. You learn what you need to do. You take control over that situation. But when you see something traumatic or tragic happen to somebody that you love, you feel really, really helpless. And you really don't know, what is going to help that person, if anything. And so I think that absolutely, I think that it was much harder on everybody else in my sort of trickle than it was on me ever. And probably still to this day.
But probably also because you seem to have a really positive, solution focused attitude. I don't know everybody who had the same circumstance would react the same way to it. You seem to be a very, all right, let's get it together and let's move forward kind of person.
Sure. And I think, maybe that is just me, or maybe that is something that I learned really, when I was 16 years old and this happened. It was sort of this do or die moment that either I continue on and I accomplish things and I keep up with my friends and I, go to college and have a job, or I don't. And that don't piece is a lot worse and a lot scarier than just figuring it out.
Have you talked to your family or, sort of your extended friend group about how your accident affected them?
Having this book come out has really sort of propelled that. And it's crazy to think because my accident was about 25 years ago. And so just now sort of opening the door to some communication on that. One thing that is very serendipitous is about a month before the book came out, I reconnected with a friend from that time that we had since just sort of parted ways. So spending time with her, we have these little coffee dates. I get to learn so much about myself back then that I didn't quite either remember or recognize. She even shared with me that I was, right after the accident, I was really adamant about not using a handicap parking spot. And I was like really, really grumpy and really stubborn about it. And I don't remember this at all, but I'm kind of like, yeah, I guess so. And she spoke to me about how her mom even shared with her how odd it was that I just kind of like kept going and didn't really, talk much about what had happened or reflect on it. And I didn't see that back then. And so that alone is kind of an interesting piece for me with my family. It's definitely starting a conversation that probably should have happened a long time ago, and that's probably going to be ongoing for quite a while. It's a weird world I have right now.
Have you been getting a lot of feedback about the book? What have people been telling you?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, for the most part, the people that have read my book are people that know me and that are part of my life already. And so obviously I've been getting a lot of good feedback, because I don't think people are going to share if they didn't like my book or they thought something was bad. Overall, I'm probably a very private person, even to some of my closer friends and acquaintances. And so I think that there's a lot of things in the book that people just wouldn't know about me. I was speaking with my best friend the other day, and she was telling me that she had just finished my book, and she said that I was really brave. And I kind of sat with that and I thought about it, and sure, maybe, but also I kind of just came to terms with the fact that when something is really, really important to you, sometimes you have to take your brain out of it. Sometimes, your brain gets too messy with consequences or regrets or things. And then that's exactly what I did. It was just, brain off, and I just finished it and put it out in the world without really a lot of consideration about, what is this going to do with like the PTO moms down the street? They're going to know my whole life story. I didn't really like think about that ahead of time, but I also suppose that I did that because I knew that it was important to me and to hopefully others. One group that I didn't really consider really enjoying my book or really like fostering my book is there's a big group of teenage girls right now reading my book. It's pretty wild. And I do think that I get it, because a lot of that sort of teenage trouble that's very typical and very like innate and inborn in every teenager. I think there is a lot of that sort of emotion and feelings that I'm working towards in the book, especially early on, maybe magnified a little bit because of my chair, but I also think that it's very relatable to that age now that I'm looking back and seeing that there are a bunch of teenagers reading it.
Well, I think it's pretty relatable, because we all go through some of that same stuff of how do I fit in and how do I navigate the world around me. Like you said, you just had the added layer of you had a wheelchair. And so that was just, it was just another level.
Well, I think was a really interesting point that you wrote in the book about that was what to do with your backpack. Like you wanted to carry your backpack just the same way that every other teenager was carrying it, and what was going through your mind as you were trying to figure out how to make that happen. And ultimately you couldn't actually make it happen, right? Correct?
Right. And that's, just one of so many stories that I've had over the years of just trying to be, quote, normal and be like everyone else. I think that's one of those like overarching themes that I've had throughout my life is just like, can I please just be boring? Can I please be the most mundane person you have ever met? And honestly, it's probably just been the last couple of months where I've sort of taken that in and said, I guess that's just not me.
No. It's not you.
No, not at all. Well, and I mean, it's funny that you were saying that your friend that you reconnected with called you brave and that you had to sit with that for a bit. I mean, that was one thing that came to my mind when I was reading the book, because the stuff that you were doing anyway, just pretty brave. I mean, going to India to get experimental treatment, trying out for the Paralympic team,
Being in the pool in general.
Yeah, being in the pool in general, going camping. I mean, I don't do that anyway. I don't go camping. So the fact that you were like, sure, I'm just going to go camping and I'm going to do all these things and blah, blah, blah. And that's all pretty badass. So I think, take that compliment of brave and just go ahead and wear it because it's there.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
yeah, you're a badass. One thing that I really liked was when you went back in, you included your diary entries.
Oh, yeah, that was so good.
Oh my God. I mean, so many things that you wrote. I mean, you were so aware and tuned in as a teenager to all the things that were going on around you. And then the entry that you said, you wrote it right after the accident and you don't even remember writing it. I mean, that there was so much presence in that entry that, I mean, that's pretty amazing that you had the presence of mind to write what you did at that time and sort of touch on all of the things that were going on with you at that moment. Can you talk about how, writing and journaling and exploring what was going on in your role, how that helped you? I mean, not just with your accident, but I mean, basically your life in general.
Oh gosh, you're gonna hate me. I made all of that up. It
Oh
was
no.
so all of those, that whole chapter of finding my diary and reading through my journal entries, that was all. I mean, obviously, like the instances were true,
Mhm.
but I couldn't figure out how to write that stuff. I
Oh,
think
okay.
that chapter was probably the hardest emotionally for me to put into words. And so that was I think the only way I could get it out was to sort of like channel that kid that was writing it.
Mhm.
And, and I very intentionally tried to write more like that kid that was sitting there in that instance and sort of grow it throughout the entries. But yeah, I made it all up.
That's
Wow.
fantastic because I thought that part, that chapter, was like the most intense of the whole book. I cried during that part when I was reading it. I actually had to put your book down for a while because I have a sister who died of alcoholism. And when you were talking about your mother and the things that you went through, I was having a little memory lane myself, and I had to put your book down for a couple of days.
Yeah.
So even if you made that part up, I don't know that you completely made that part up.
Well, yeah, I would say like the instances were all true,
Yeah.
but I think that to share all of those things, the only way that I was able to do it physically, emotionally, spiritually was to write it as a journal entry.
That part was so intense. It was so well written. I mean, it was very touching. It touched me. And I'm someone who doesn't know you.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, it touched me for sure.
Yeah. And just talking about your mom's story and your parents' marriage and how that was all affecting you and your sister. I mean, that was pretty powerful.
It's really interesting because I think even some of my friends that are closest to me and have been close to me during all of that time, they've all reached out to me and said, I didn't know it was that bad. I didn't know it was like that. Or I didn't actually, my best friend, she lives in Germany, she called me and was so sorry that she thought my basement apartment was cool. And I was like, oh, please don't be sorry. And she was like, I was one of those. I thought it was so neat that you got to live in the basement and you had this apartment. And I'm so sorry. I didn't even think about it. I think some of it, just writing it made it, it's like, it's always in me, all of these things that have happened and the emotions and the things that have been really, really yucky. They've always been there, but I don't outwardly share them to even the closest people to me. And I think I just had to write them down. I had to get them out some other way. And that's really how the book began. I didn't ever sit down, 15 years ago and said, I'm going to write a book and I'm going to be the best memoirist, whatever. And I just started writing them down, and I actually wrote them down not chronologically. I wrote these stories down based on like the lesson that I was learning at that moment or whatever. And originally I was going to try to publish it that way. And so I had to go back through with sticky notes and actually put everything chronologically together to make it make sense for the rest of the world, not just for my brain. But my gosh, I mean, like I said earlier, I just learned so much about myself and learned, I think, about how much I really have struggled in the world, because I have always been really good about not letting myself stop for a minute to even see that.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think the biggest lesson or biggest takeaway you have from writing it for yourself?
Definitely the fact that the moments where I've been the most vulnerable and felt the worst about myself are the very same moments where I have been able to show my true strengths to the world and really kind of rise above who I thought I was or what I could do or what I was capable of. That was something that once I got towards the end of my book, it was like really like chiming on me. And I just really, really felt all of that vulnerability and just felt so much power from it.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. And it was, like I said, like everybody needs to just sit down and write out all their stories, because you'll learn so much about what's like really going on.
Wow. I mean, you are just radiating talking about that. You just got really excited. I love that.
Yeah. Well, it is exciting, right?
It's very exciting. I love the part, well, I didn't love that you were sick, but I love the part where you were sick and eventually you like just started to sneak out to go swimming and like knew that you needed that to take care of yourself. That was one of my favorite pieces in the book. What has swimming meant to you over the years? Raquel and I were both part of the diving team. What did it mean to you?
Yeah.
Well, I often share with people that swimming has been the thing that has saved me over and over again. I think when I first was in my accident, and I talked about how it was really easy for me to just sort of like get up and go because I wanted to do things. I think having sort of an athlete mindset, because I had been a swimmer all growing up, really helped me out, because I understood the value of practicing things and to set a goal for yourself. And I think that initially really helped me just to be able to kind of progress and move forward without really getting stuck in what had happened. Also, swimming has been that thing for me. It's been the one thing that I don't have a wheelchair. I don't have any sort of assistive equipment whatsoever. It's just me and the water, like it always was. And so it's really like the one thing that I've been able to bridge my life before my accident and my life afterwards. And it's the one thing that I can bridge that's like, that feels good. And it's something I started coaching right pretty much after my accident, I think, because people didn't really know what to do with me. They didn't know if I was going to be able to swim or what that was going to look like, if I was going to want to. And these lovely parent representative ladies gave me a beautiful coaching job for the summer. And that's where it all started. I've been coaching ever since. And so I've been coaching for 25 years. My husband and I own a swim team, and we coach that. My 8-year-old swims on the swim team, and he is fantastic, and he has no idea. And so it's just, yeah. And you mentioned that I got back in the pool when I wasn't supposed to, and I was on bed rest. And that was because I was just in this really dark, depressive time in my life. And I just, every night I would just want to go to sleep because I knew I would dream about swimming. And that's when it sort of hit me like, I've got to do this. And then getting me back into the pool made me realize that I had some like unfinished business for myself. I had been coaching and just leisurely swimming, but there was, that competitive side of me that wasn't done. And So when I was doing these little secret swims, I finally made a promise to myself that I was going to put 100% of myself into swimming and competing and see how far it would take me. And it was sort of like this like very prominent test of mine where I wanted to see if you truly put yourself into something 100%, what you can get out of it. And so I swam on my own and trained for 2 solid years to try to make the Paralympic team that year. And I mean, I was getting up at 3:30 every morning so that I could swim before I taught a full load of classes and then went and coached that evening. And I was dishing out all sorts of money to fly to Toronto and California and Mexico and all these places because these disability swim meets, it wasn't like I could go to the local Y and have a disability swim meet. They're just not that, they're few and far between. And so just having to sort of manage that piece of my life. And, when it was all said and done, I went to the Paralympic trials and I had a fantastic meet and I was feeling really good about myself, and I didn't make the team. And it was this really sort of kind of like out of body experience where I was like looking over myself going, are you going to cry? What are you going to do? Because I had put so much effort and energy into that moment. And I never really stopped to think about what was I going to do after that moment.
Mhm.
And I was really shocked. I was content. I was completely proud of myself because I knew that there wasn't anything else I could have done. And I had gotten that far, and that was as far as that journey was going to take me. And that was okay. And it was, a really, really special experience because I don't know that there are many people that can say that they've put 100% of themselves into one thing. And I now know that you do that and you feel great afterwards, no matter the outcome, because you trust that piece that you're going to be good.
I hear what you're saying about that. And I feel like that runs throughout your book, that runs throughout your life. That drive that you have and that push of putting all of yourself into something and just doing it, just, like that athlete mindset that you talked about before. That's admirable.
Thank you. And the trust. You brought up something really important, Raquel. This quote, I have always been a hopeless fatalist and have had so much practice at just letting go with the wind of the universe. So much so that I not only learned to trust it, but I've also learned to expect it. I expect the universe to hold my hand and lead me to where I am supposed to be.
That's very true.
Beautifully written.
Mm.
And what I'm hearing from Raquel and from you is that you trusted, you also put in the work. It takes the work as well. And then you just let it be whatever it's going to be. How many people can actually do that?
Well, I think some of it is from my accident. I very quickly kind of fostered that mindset of that kind of like everything happens for a reason. And because if I didn't think that way, then I would have been like, why me? Why am I in a wheelchair? Why did this accident happen? But it was just kind of, one of those ideals that just kind of sat with me and was like, okay, well, this is how this works. And believing that way made it okay for me to just go and continue on. And I think that also sort of stems from learning that life is very finite and that if you don't jump now, you might not get the chance to jump later. So yeah, I think there's a lot of things that I was forced to learn at a time where maybe, it was unfair or whatever the case may be. Whatever it is, the perspective that I gained really helped encourage me to do things probably more so than I would have ever done otherwise.
I know the book is still pretty new, but have you started getting responses from women's groups, from Paralympic groups, or people with disabilities? I mean, what sort of responses are you getting from people about the book and about your experience?
So I haven't gotten a ton yet. At this point, the book has been out for about 2.5 weeks.
Oh, that's right. It's still
Yeah.
very new.
Still very new. I did have an old colleague of mine reach out to me and said, like, this should be in the high schools. The high schoolers should be reading this. And this was kind of where I talked about teenagers reading it. I had a mom tell me that her daughter was reading it for her 10th grade nonfiction project she's doing right now. And another mom that I talked to whose daughter stole it from her and won't give it back until she's done. And so I think that there's something there. I do know that there's a group of master swimmers, so adult swimmers, that are going to read it for their book club, which I think is pretty fantastic. And I'm excited to hopefully join them in on that at some point. Hopefully it just continues to grow and spread. And I don't know if it's like my competitive nature or that it's just like there's a piece of my heart in there, but I just want everybody to have it and I want everybody to experience it.
You wrote a very interesting blog post about marketing yourself. That's a big part of this, writing a book, isn't it? It's hard.
It is, and it's not my favorite part of it either.
What do you have to do to market yourself when you write a book?
Well, this book is self-published, and so I am every piece of this book. I'm constantly trying to figure out how to get across social media more, and just to have that, it's almost like watching my book start to trickle to the next reader and then the next reader. And I think at this point, my little like puddle is filled of all of the people that I love. And really, I hope that someday that it's filled with all the people that I've never even met before. I don't know why, but I would be so ecstatic if somebody somewhere that didn't know me picked up my book and thought it was a fiction piece. I don't know why that is like the thing that I would love, but I would love that.
When did you first think, ooh, I've got a book in me that needs to just get out?
So I probably wrote a few chapters before I even thought about putting them together anyway. And then when I was still teaching, I started getting excited about possibly writing it for real and publishing it. But it wasn't until I was pregnant with my second child that I kind of had this oh no moment, because all of a sudden, once he's born, my life is going to be so much more them than me. And so that's when I really got serious about it and was like, I want to finish this. I'm going to finish it. I'm going to publish this. I want to do this for myself because I might not have a lot of self for a couple of years after that. And now my baby is now 3. Well, he'll be 3 in 2 weeks. And so that it took me that much even longer after he was born.
Wow, I just read yesterday that he was born.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm going to quote you again because you just led up to this, but I've been quoting you a lot. You have a lot of really great stuff in this book. You said, growing another human inside of you is actually a lot like writing a book. Retelling my story is something that sat inside of me for long. It grew slowly and took shape from every piece of life. It was painful. There was so much deleted and hidden away. It was so agonizing, but in the end, that pain was good. The pain needed a house, somewhere to lay its weary head at night, a book, something that I had been carrying with me for so long. This is probably my favorite piece of the book was that paragraph. Tell us about that and maybe about birthing children.
Yeah. In just writing the book, I really felt as when I was pregnant that it was like, wait, these are very parallel events, because, and that's sort of how I wrote in that last chapter. I rewrote that chapter, I don't know, like 9 times, but I finally was like, this is a really paralleled experience and I really enjoy feeling it that way. Because when you're pregnant, you are, taking care of this being that you don't really know, but you love it so much. And eventually it's going to come out and it's going to have its own existence beyond you. And that's really, once I was getting closer to the end of my book, that's really how it felt with that. And it was like my baby is about to come out into the world. And yeah, with that birth, that was my youngest, and my oldest baby is 5 years older. You know, I think that any mom can relate to having a baby, but my experience with having a child and being paralyzed was maybe not the same that most people have, because there was a lot of worry. There was a lot of that, like, fear of the unknown happening, especially when I was first pregnant with my eldest child, just because I didn't know a lot of things about my body and how my body was going to work in the end, and very, very worried about being able to feel contractions and give a vaginal birth or have a natural birth with my firstborn. And the universe was on my side 100%, because I had gone to coach a complete morning practice, and then I went with my husband for a routine OB appointment where my OB was telling me, your body is great, you know your body so well, you're so in tune, you're gonna know everything, you're gonna go full term. And like literally after she finished this speech about how good I know my body, she checks my cervix and says, oh, I feel hair, you need to go to the hospital probably right now. And you know, that I think my child was born, I don't know, 6 hours later. And so it's so silly how your body really is controlled by your brain in a lot of senses, because then when I was pregnant with my second child, the only thing that was in my brain that entire time was, you don't feel contractions, you don't feel contractions, you don't feel contractions. And so I was constantly worried. I think from about like 20 weeks on, I swear every night I was going to give birth in my sleep. And so I slept really terribly. And I had like these pH strips so that I could test fluid, because, you know, when baby's sitting on your bladder, there's sometimes fluid that comes out that's not amniotic fluid. And so I was constantly testing to see if there was a baby coming, or if I was just peeing myself everywhere. And goodness. And then finally, it was the same OB that I had with my initial birth. And she said, okay, fine. I will schedule to induce you, but I will not do it any earlier than the first day of your 39th week. And so it was like, fine, we'll schedule that. And that felt really good. I think above anything, I'm a huge planner. And so to have, you know, that on the calendar, give birth that day, okay, that felt a lot better. And so like moving forward, going into that, the day before my induction, my husband and I coached a full swim meet, high school boys meet. And we had sent my oldest child to my dad's house. We were getting all ready. We went out to dinner, but the whole time this baby was sitting so goofy in me. And I kept feeling this like weird sort of pain in my side. And I thought it was just sort of how he was sitting, because he always sort of moved and sat kind of strangely inside of my body. And, you know, and I didn't really let myself think about it too much, because I can't feel contractions. And, you know, even that morning, I told my husband, you stay home, I'll go to the induction. You know, everything I've read says this thing takes like 10 hours. And so I'll just like hang out and watch some TV. It'll be awesome. And so I got in to the hospital, and I had the admitting nurse kind of was like checking off all the boxes. And I said, you know, I do have this like weird pain, and I can kind of feel it in my teeth. Isn't that strange? And she says, okay, let's hook you up to the contraction monitor. And sure enough, I was in active labor.
Wow.
This baby was born 2 hours later.
Wow.
And so I was really, really, really lucky with both births of my children.
And how was momhood?
You know, it's so wonderful. It's so before my children were born, I, of course, always wanted to be a mom, but I never really focused much on that, because I think that I was really worried that it may not happen. And I didn't want that to be something that I was sad about or regretted or even blamed my wheelchair or paralysis on. And so I never really let myself have much emotional experience with wanting to be a mom. But then once I was a mom, once I am a mom, it it just changes you. And I kind of alluded to the fact that like my life isn't mine anymore. It's all of ours. and it's really great. Of course there's like, I feel like there's a piece of myself that is on hold a little bit, but the replacement of having these two lives that I get to help grow to be the best things that they can be is like the best feeling in the world.
I love that. Your youngest is probably too young to, talk about this, but your oldest, you said he's 8, right?
Yeah.
Right. How does he relate to your wheelchair? Is it just, oh, this is just part of mommy, or how does that play into his life?
Totally. So I think probably until he was maybe about 5, it was just sort of like, this is mom, and why are you looking at her funny? I don't understand. It was like, that was all he knew. I mean, I remember instances where I was getting in the car and he'd be in this car seat in the back, and somebody would come over to see if I needed help, and I would kind of shy them away, like, I'm fine, I got it. And then he would be like, mommy, why did they ask you if you needed help? And so probably it wasn't until he was 6 or 7 when I think probably the thing that made him recognize that it wasn't normal was his peers would say, why is on the playground, like, why is your mom in a wheelchair? That's kind of weird. And he always sort of would answer with like, well, she was in an accident. And then like, you want to go play on the monkey bars? And so it's still, I think, sort of, it's a non-issue. However, I think he understands that it is different. His gym teacher actually stopped me not too long ago and said that they were talking about the human body, and they were talking about the spine and how you can break your spine. And somebody in class had mentioned, oh, I know somebody that's in a wheelchair. And his gym teacher said that he was kind of watching my kid to see if he kind of spoke up, because he's a pretty verbal kid and likes to participate in class. And he said they was pretty surprised that he didn't speak up and talk about me. And so I think that, there is a lot of me and him in terms of how we emote or not. There's still this piece of where it's a big deal because it's different, but it's also all we know as a family. And those two things sort of like balance each other as they play back and forth. And he knows that I was in a car accident. I don't think he knows any like gory details or anything. And he doesn't need to yet until he starts driving himself.
Right. Maybe this is a really simplistic view of it. And if it is, I apologize, but it doesn't seem like it's a limitation for you.
No, I would agree. And I think that if anything, it's just like a natural lesson over and over again. I mean, even when my babies were, 1, 2 years old, they would know without having to have a conversation about it, the things that I could and couldn't do. If they need something from the top shelf, they will go ask daddy. They will not ask me. And they know, and in fact, my 8-year-old is now starting to get to the age where he's big enough to actually offer help in certain situations. And actually, just a couple months ago, he started asking if he could we have like an SUV car, if he could put my wheelchair in the back rather than me take it apart when we go places. And so that's something that he actually, I think, carries with a lot of pride right now. It's being able to put my wheelchair in the back. And it's like kind of scary for me still. I feel like very weird about it. But I see that it's like almost this like rite of passage that he's having growing up. And so they're just like really neat things, I think, tied to these natural lessons on a daily basis. I think one thing I talked about in the book was, and I only talked about it very briefly, but the first time that my oldest boy came up behind me and pushed me in my chair when I needed a little bit help. And it wasn't something where he was like pushing me around like, you want to drive me like a maniac, and it wasn't, he just recognized that I was struggling a little bit. And then he offered the exact right amount of help, not too much, and then we just kept going. And it was it was not something that he really had to think about. Wasn't like super proud of himself because he totally helped me. It was just, he recognized that I needed it and he gave it and we moved on. And that,
What a beautiful moment.
yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that part in the book really, really touched me.
Mm-hmm. You said something about people coming to you when you're getting in the car and wanting to help you with your wheelchair and how that can actually be uncomfortable. And I think that our listeners, myself included, could learn a little bit about this. How can we be helpful and not helpful?
Gosh, it's so hard to, because I'm only me and I'm probably extra stubborn. And so I can't speak for all people that are in wheelchairs or disabled or what have you, but I think just being more open-minded. I think the difference between asking somebody if they need help, that, and I've had people not, as they're asking if I need help, actually physically grab my wheelchair from me, and so there's a difference.
Yeah.
So asking someone if they need help is totally fine. And especially the way that you approach it. In the past, in some of my younger years, I got really caught up in like, oh, this person's just trying to make themselves feel better and they're not even like looking at me. And I don't care. At this point, I see people as good. And if you're going to ask me for help, you're just trying to help. And I'm never going to discredit that. But yeah, I think just being as aware and as sort of kind as you would want someone to be to you. And that's good enough.
That's a good lesson for all of us.
All of us.
Ryan, there was something that you wrote on Instagram pretty recently, I think, that I would like to read, and I would love it if you would speak to it a little bit.
Okay.
It's a little long, but okay. It starts with, but we know it, we feel it. It is instead a blessing to see the world through a unique set of eyes, with a great value in thinking differently, approaching each day with creativity, flexibility, and strength. It's a feeling like none other when you look in the mirror and see a woman whose disability has not defined her, but enriched her. And there's a satisfaction in loving that woman for everything she is. So celebrate who you are and everything you bring to the world. Celebrate it surrounded by the women who carry a common streak of energy and courage. Let's join together, lift each other up, and show the world that we are not only savvy, skillful, bold, and beautiful, but we stand united as one community.
That was a collaboration with a friend of mine who is a local disabled athlete who is an author as well. She's a really fabulous woman. And we've been sort of trying to join forces a little bit in terms of getting more awareness about in the disability community, and in terms of just like really enriching that community and bringing it together a little bit more. So that's what that was.
When I read it, it just landed right here, just right in my heart. And I feel like it applies to all of us.
Sure. Yeah.
We're one community. We all have something about us that makes us unique, that is our strength. And surround yourself with people who love you and support you.
Absolutely.
So thank you for putting that quote out into the world. So I just wanted to bring a little attention to that.
Yeah.
That quote could have been equally used for International Women's Day, which was just a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I was going to ask you, but I think the quote might be the answer. I was going to ask you if you felt like your book was, or how it could be tied to feminism. But I think the quote might have already answered it. Do you have any more feelings on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that in terms of feminism, I think that there's so much in my book about your identity and just your natural identity, but also the identity that, maybe that has been forced upon you or otherwise. And so I think that it's a really relatable, universal piece, because everybody identifies somehow with something. And our society makes it that way because it's very, very centered on your own identities, whether it be male, female, anything in between. Or my identity is very often just this disabled woman. And that is something that I have actually had to learn to love, because is an identity that has a lot of, I guess, natural connotations, or, you know, anybody that has a disability, I think it's very quick to think about the thing that they lost. If somebody has a disability, there's something that they've lost, or there's something that they don't have. And it took me a really long time to see that differently, to see the light of it, that yeah, that everybody that has a disability has either lost or doesn't have something, and look at what they've done.
You rose above it.
Yeah.
So, and you, oh God, I love this book so much, Ryan. I think,
thank you.
I mean, I really do. And I think, you know, like you were saying, there are all these people who are reading it, and there's teenage girls who are reading it, and all this. There's a through line of it of self-determination, which I think is going to be really good for young girls to read and hear about. Where do you see this, your journey as an author, say, I don't know, 5 years from now, 10 years from now?
Well, I really think that this book sort of unleashed something for me in terms of, you know, I've always enjoyed writing things, but it was always sort of like behind closed doors, or an afterthought to something else that I was doing. But finishing this book and has just really empowered me to want to continue my writing journey, whatever that may be. And you know, it's just like keeps me really buzzy, and I'm always like thinking of different things. And I started writing some short stories, and even like personal essays for different publications. And I have a meeting with someone this week about some children's books. So that's something I actually, ever since my oldest was about 2 years old, every year for their birthdays, I write and illustrate a children's book. So I have like a bookshelf of books sitting at our house that I'd like to see if like maybe some other kids would like them too. And so I have that to sort of dive into. And, you know, that I do have, you know, writing a memoir, writing a personal piece like that is really, really rough. And it's not just rough in the writing. It's, you know, I mean, it's just putting a piece of your heart in a story and giving it to the world. And it's, so maybe I would like to try to write something fiction next to give my heart a break.
I totally see it.
Yeah. I'm glad that you're on the show so that we can help get the word out about your book, because, and, you know, about all the other things that you know, want to have coming down the pike, because I think that would be really great if we could help be a part of getting the rest of your work that's coming along out into the world, and especially the children's books. I think that's so cool that you write books for each of your boys for their birthdays.
I'm finishing my youngest, his birthday's in 2 weeks. So I'm finishing his up right now, and I'll tell you a little bit about it. For some reason, he calls everything yesterday. He'll say, when we went to Santa Fe yesterday, can we go to the zoo again like we went to yesterday? And so his book is titled Yesterday Is Not Today. and it talks all about different flows of time, and how, you know, we use the word tomorrow or next week, and how it's
that's so sweet.
So I'm excited about finishing that one. I have a lot of things in me that need to come out yet. So
was there anything any message that you wanted to send out to our listeners, or that...
Right? Yes, your listeners could be readers. There's my message.
I think it's very possible some of them will be. It's a really great book. It was a good read. It's very well written. It's interesting. The part in the middle threw me for a loop. It's just a great message, and it's a great story, and you can tell it's from the heart. You can feel you in that book.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really well done. So yes, please buy it.
Yeah.
Ryan, thank you very much for being on. And, you know, like Jennifer said, read this book, everybody. Read this book. Please. It is good. It is lovely. And follow Ryan on Instagram too. Yeah. And I have to say, let me just put this out there. It was so cute, the video that you posted of your son unboxing the books that came to your house, and he was like, "You're gonna sell those?"
Yeah.
That was so cute. He was just
Yeah.
like, this is what mommy's gonna do. I love it.
Yeah,
That was
it's really fun. Yeah, thank you.
awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ryan. It was such a joy to speak with you, and we can't wait to see what's coming next.
Great. Yeah, thank you both so much. This has been really fun.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, keep in touch.
I love this book. I love it. I love it so much. It's so good. I'm just amazed at how just bold and badass that she is. And I mean, yeah.
The book surprised me, and that doesn't happen very often.
Surprised you in what way?
It surprised me when, well, some of her story I kind of gathered from following her on Instagram and kind of knew what was going to happen. And so some of it kind of knew. And then when we hit that part in the middle where she really talked about her family, how her accident really caused trauma to her mother, her father, her sister. When she said, there was a part in there where she said the accident actually stunted the growth of her sister's brain at that time. I was like, oh, this is what family trauma is about. And it really did bring me right back into my own family trauma. I had to put the book down for 2 days. I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
And then I picked it up again. And that surprised me because you don't often feel that depth of emotion in a book. It really is truly her. You feel her in that book. It was excellent.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much emotion that comes through in the pages of this book that regardless of, like she says, regardless of what your chair is, you're going to get a lot out of this book.
Oh, Raquel, what's your chair?
Ooh. Damn, I'm pretty sure I have more than one.
Okay, but what's the first one that comes to mind?
I hold myself back a lot. I do. I hold myself back a lot. It's really difficult sometimes for me to push myself and to believe in myself and to know that I can get further and achieve more. So I think that's, and I'm sure there's a whole list of reasons why that is, but that I think is probably my most significant chair for sure. What about you?
I knew you would burn that. I had thought about it beforehand. I think my chair is my family trauma. I think it either allowed me or because of it, I created some walls around myself. And through therapy, I'm now bringing those walls down. And so in some ways, my chair is maybe dissolving or maybe supporting me better. Maybe supporting me better is a different way of putting it, because I think I'll always have that chair of family trauma.
Yeah.
But I'm learning how to be supported by it rather than how to be held back by it. Oh, wow. We just went through therapy again.
Yeah. You're learning how to utilize your chair in a better way.
Exactly.
You're using it as a tool instead of a crutch.
Wow. Well done, Raquel.
Thank you. You as well. Bye. Thanks everyone for listening today. We will be back with more Madness Cafe next week. You can find us on Instagram at Madness Cafe Podcast or email us at madnesscafepodcast@gmail.com. Bye.